Happy New Year, Guardians! I hope you all had a safe and fun celebration. With the new year in full swing, I wanted to share 5 of my favorite solar support builds in case anyone's New Year's resolution is to do a little more healing. We'll have 2 builds for Titans, 2 builds for Warlocks, and 1 build for Hunters. In case you were wondering, these builds are pretty flexible and do work in all pieces of content, while the gameplay being shown is just some Vanguard strikes, very basic stuff. I have taken all of these builds into GMs, raids, dungeons, PvP, even Gambit, with plenty of success. Alright, let's just go ahead and start talking about them. First, I will be starting with our 2 Titan builds. So for our first Titan build, we have kind of a lazy healer build that will be utilizing Precious Scars. Honestly, this is probably my favorite Titan build at the moment. And if you're in the market for kind of a passive healer kind of playstyle, this is the build for you. Precious Scars will grant a burst of restoration whenever you get a kill with a weapon matching your super element. So while this build is actually using a solar subclass, you can use this on any subclass if you so choose. So, just something to keep in mind. Another nice thing about this build is how flexible it is. The only thing you really need to make this build work is a solar weapon, or well, I guess just a weapon matching your super element. But for us, we're doing solar, so yes, literally any solar weapon at all, period. You can see in the build that I actually just kind of have some stock ritual weapons that I just keep on my Titan and my Hunter just for, inventory's sake, just things to kind of placeholders, I guess you could say. But you can realistically use anything you wanted. It really doesn't matter. I'll go ahead and spoil the surprise by saying that the fragments will be mostly the same throughout all of these builds. Ember of Benevolence and Ember of Torches are pretty much a requirement on solar support builds because they are just so good with a support playstyle. And from there, I usually go with Ember of Solace, though you can replace Solace with Tempering if you wanted to. Lastly, I do use Ember of Mercy, which is especially useful on this build. Ember of Mercy already puts out a burst of restoration whenever you revive someone. Pair that with Precious Scars, and this build is not only a great passive source of restoration, but also makes you pretty much invincible after reviving someone. For mods with this build, I usually just go with things that will make our solar weapons a little bit better, since solar weapon kills will be the primary way that we are giving out restoration to our allies. Titan build number 2 is actually pretty similar to number 1, just with some key differences. So this is our Phoenix Cradle build, and it's a more active version, I'll say, of our Precious Scars build. The reason that I consider it that is because Phoenix Cradle works by making it so that your sunspots can now also give your allies restoration and ability regen as well. Of course, your teammates have to actually know that you're using it and remember to run into your sunspots, or at least, have it placed in their path for this to work. That's why I actually currently have it set up on one of my raid builds. I find that this build works significantly better in a coordinated group who can know ahead of time that they should remember to run into the sunspots and not just ignore them. Though I will say, you could switch up some mods if you wanted to make this a bit better for things like GMs, PvP, etc. Like the last build, this one is pretty flexible, but a little bit less so. The Sol Invictus aspect is pretty much a requirement for this build. Actually, I shouldn't even say pretty much. It is a requirement for this build. And I'd highly recommend bringing at least one weapon that has incandescent on it. Remember that sunspots are created from ability final blows, defeating scorched enemies, and your super. If you're juggling your abilities and applying Scorch, you should have no problem keeping a bunch of sunspots down for your team. From there, the build remains mostly the same as our first build. Ember of Benevolence and Torches are going to be musts, while Mercy, Solace, and Tempering are also great choices. Mods aren't too terribly important. Again, I'd have them set up similar to the first build and just focus on slaying out with your incandescent weapon. Overall, this is arguably the better build, but a bit more complex than Precious Scars. With a little bit of coordination and hopefully a good bit of luck, this build is phenomenal in endgame content. Next, we're on to our hunters. So, like I mentioned earlier, I actually only have one build for you guys. And I'll admit, I had to get a little bit creative with this one. Hunters actually don't seem to have a whole lot of solar support build opportunities. They don't have a whole lot of sources of restoration. Most of their support exotics tend to fall under the void category, so, let me know if you guys want some void builds, because I've got plenty of those for hunters. This build revolves around helping your teammates put out more damage through high radiant uptimes, speed loader slacks, and on your mark. Right off the bat, knock them down and on your mark are going to be required for this build. Fortunately, on your mark actually gives us 3 fragment slots instead of the normal 2, so no need to worry about which fragments to choose, because we can have every support fragment that we have talked about so far. You may think the Ember of Torches is perhaps a little bit overkill with the lightweight knife, and that's totally fair. But I tend to use the lightweight knife more for the additional melee charge that it gives us, rather than the radiance on precision hits. I don't know about you guys, I'm not always hitting my precision knives. So, I still tend to, bring Ember of Torches, because I think it's necessary for me. If you're just a god tier hunter, then hey, respect to you. While you don't have to use Acrobat's Dodge, I do highly recommend it as it gives more uptime to Radiant and Benevolence. Weapons and mods are pretty flexible, so feel free to copy mine, or don't, whatever works best for you. I would definitely bring some sort of weapon that can apply restoration though. Red Death and No Hesitation are great choices because hunters, like I mentioned, don't really have a whole lot of sources of restoration, so your weapon slot will probably have to cover most of your healing. Ideally, your mods, like our Titan builds, should lean into dealing weapon damage, as this will help keep on your mark stacks on your teammates. Plus, if you're using Red Death, more kills equals more healing. Again though, mods aren't too terribly important for a lot of these builds, same with weapons, so you can kind of work around it to your liking, but that's just my personal preference. Despite this being our only hunter build, it is definitely the most unique and one of the most fun builds on this list. Last but certainly not least, we are on to our Warlocks. Our first Warlock build is one that you've probably seen pretty frequently if you've been around the channel or caught any streams. This is probably my favorite build overall at the moment, and it is the Speaker's Sight build. This build is going to let you have an insane uptime on Restoration ×2 and Ember of Benevolence by almost always having a healing turret on the ground. To start, your super isn't important. I have Song of Flame on by default, but I pretty regularly change it to Well of Radiance as well, just depending on the content. Your first aspect should most definitely be Touch of Flame, but your second isn't really important and you can use whatever you like. No changes to our fragments from other builds, these are still the fragments that you're going to want to have. Weapons aren't too terribly important. I like to bring No Hesitation for the extra healing output and Benevolence uptime, but you can absolutely bring something with Demolitionist if your discipline is maybe a little on the low side. Your mod should focus on your grenade, as you're going to want to have this on as low of a cooldown as you possibly can. I use Font of Focus because my discipline is right about tier 7. However, if you have tier 8 or higher, I would actually run Kickstart over Font. Other than that, the usual Bomber, Innervation, etc. Outside of Grenade Recharge, you can kind of just run whatever you like, or just, feel free to copy me if you want. I absolutely love this build, and Speaker Sight is truly one of the best support exotics in the game right now. If you enjoy Warlock and you enjoy healing, this is the build for you. I mean, this thing is amazing. And on to our final build, an oldie but a goodie. This is the Boots of the Assembler build. The beauty of this build is that it can provide tons of healing and damage buffing while also being able to lean more heavily into one or the other depending on the content. The only drawback is that this build is going to require you to stay in your rift pretty often, meaning this will be great in things like GMs, onslaught, dares, etc., but probably not quite as good in things like PvP and Gambit. The two most important things in this build are going to be the Lumina exotic hand cannon and the Boots of the Assembler exotic boots. Essentially, the gameplay loop for this build is just going to be casting a rift, standing in it, letting your two exotics extend the duration of your rifts. Whether you choose healing or damage is totally up to you, because Lumina will provide both healing and damage, so you'll always have both. The rift is kind of just personal preference. For our super, I recommend going with Well of Radiance, as Boots of the Assembler do work with Well of Radiance. Aspects are unimportant, though if I had to just throw something out there, I would say that Hellion would be an excellent choice. Fragments are the same as the other builds. Again, Ember of Benevolence is going to do a lot of the heavy lifting here, because the noble rounds from your rifts and Lumina will proc Ember of Benevolence, which will help you keep a higher uptime on your rifts, which will help you keep a higher uptime on Benevolence. You get the idea. You get the idea. Outside of Lumina, weapons really aren't important, and you can just use whatever works for you. Mods should mainly focus on class ability regeneration, and whatever's left over should be dedicated towards making Lumina perform just a little bit better. This used to be my most used build by far before Speaker Sight came into the picture. Even then, though, I still find plenty of uses for it to this day, and I definitely think you should try it out. Okay, it looks like that's everything we had to cover today. I meant to get this video out a little bit earlier, but I hope it was worth the wait, and let me know if you plan on using any of these builds. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. I've got plenty more videos coming up in the near future, so make sure to subscribe and use the link below to follow me on stuff if you'd like to see more videos like this one. Now that the craziness of the holidays are over, I do hope to get back to being a bit more consistent with posting videos and live streaming. Yes, I promise I have not forgotten about streaming, and I promise that we will get back to streaming soon, and I sincerely thank you for your patience if you're one of my Twitch viewers. But with all that out of the way, I think all I've got left to say is that I've been Doc. Take care of yourselves, be good to others, don't forget about your New Year's resolution, and I will catch y'all in the next one.